this. Okay, now that I know that I have this well of knowledge and intellect and talent and insights and accomplishments, how do I distill that down into some good ideas? How do I crack that nut of, well, I don't know what to write about?
If you ever take any copywriting courses or read a single copywriting book, every single one will tell you about this idea of the rule of one. You want to write to one specific person. Stephen King, in his book on writing, calls it ideal reader. And you want to create ideal reader in your head. How old are they? Where do they live? What do they do? What kind of car do they drive? What do they look like? And so when you start to put these puzzle pieces together, you have your one specific person and you have your one specific idea. It kind of all snaps into place. Finally, one ask at the end of your post. What do you want that person to do? Do you want them to comment? Do you want them to book a call with you? Do you want them to visit your website? One, all the way through. One ask, one idea, one person.
The idea of job security is outdated as a landline. If you haven't been in a search for a while, it's probable you will at some point, by choice or not. Most executives admit to staying way too long or sense what's coming and justify staying anyway. There's another reason. The faulty belief that navigating to what's next will inevitably be worse and has to suck. Screw that. Lauren Greif has spent a lifetime in corporate and executive search, calling bullshit on stale career advice that most still use. This is Career Blast in a Half, the career podcast for executives ready to cut past outdated career advice to fuel your outcomes now. So let's go.
Well, hello, executives, C-suiters, people in job transition. And guess what? I am admittedly fangirling myself, so don't feel alone, because today's episode is with our guest of honor, Adam Knorr, Knorr, like the soup company. And I actually have been known to call him Professor Knorr. And I occasionally get some shout outs from Adam, and I feel like, oh my God. So the reason why Adam is here is because in some of his earlier life, he was in Hawaii. He was, making coffee beans. I don't know what he was doing. He was doing all kinds of crazy things. And then he decided that he would focus in on words that matter and copywriting that earns all the things that you in your job search are looking for. So here we are, Adam Knorr. Thank you so much for being here. And today's episode is called Copy for C-Suiters, Words That Win Jobs. So please introduce yourself as so we can hear some of your wild and crazy career transitions and what brought you to this place.
Sure, Lauren. Thank you for the introduction, and I'll do my best to live up to how you just hyped me up, but I'm not sure that's going to be possible. So my background is, I studied journalism in school, and then when I graduated, I realized pretty quickly that working in journalism in the mid-2010s doesn't exactly set you up for a life of wealth. And I was interested in that. So I took a quick career 180, and for 6 years, from the time I was 22 to the time I was 28, I worked in finance, wore a suit and a tie, went into a cubicle every single day, the whole 9 yards. The entire time, in the back of my head, I had this idea that I wanted to write for a living. I didn't know exactly what that looked like, but I knew there was some way out there where I could combine my writing passion and my writing skill into something that legitimately paid the bills for me. And the point of inflection for me, Lauren, it was in 2022. I was up for what I would consider to be a life-changing promotion in finance. It would have been more money than I ever dreamed of. And I was concerned that if I took it, that it would essentially slap the golden handcuffs on me for good. And I would not have an opportunity to leave and to go do what I felt like I was called to do. So that was kind of my put up or shut up moment. I realized that I didn't want to be in this career path, so I walked into the office the next day. I handed in my 2 weeks notice. I moved to Hawaii. I lived on a coffee farm for about 6 months where I was a tour guide and started writing online and just posting on LinkedIn, trying to figure out what the next step in my career was, what that would be. And of course, because of the power of words and personal branding and social media, the dominoes started to tip each other over. And today I have a full-time career essentially built on the back of LinkedIn, primarily as a LinkedIn ghostwriter, but that's branched out into full-on book ghostwriting, copywriting, all sorts of different things with the written word. So it's been quite a path, and I feel very fortunate to be where I am.
You are living proof of just tremendous resilience and listening to that inner voice, right? And a lot of people wish that they didn't have those golden handcuffs and maybe feeling like I just can't take them off, I just can't take them off. And so my question for you with all of this, kind of sorting it out and landing on the writing piece is, why is writing a missing secret sauce for anyone in their career, and especially for C-suiters in their job search? Why is that something that people either resist or think it's not going to make a big difference?
It's a great question. I think there's a few different paths that jump to mind immediately. One is, I think that for a long time, and I was guilty of this too, I think the craft of writing started to take a hit. I certainly know that, I just talked about it. My impression was that writing, you can't pay the bills writing. Like, nobody makes money as a writer, right? And so I think that a lot of us have this idea in our heads that it's just not a lucrative way to attract business, when in fact, the opposite is true. And you could argue that the opposite is true, because if 99% of the world sees writing that way, well, then the 1% of the world who realizes the opportunity in writing and actually pursues it, economics 101, right? Supply and demand and scarcity. And there's so much scarcity there. We talk about LinkedIn specifically, and LinkedIn recently passed 1 billion users. And if you look at the data, fewer than 16% of those users post on LinkedIn more than once a week. So you've got this massive B2B audience on a platform where people are expecting to do business with mostly high net worth users, and nobody's out there talking, right? So I do think a lot of us have this perception that writing does not pay the bills, when in reality, it's just an untapped market, in my opinion. And I think so many people, and when I get on coaching calls or I work with new clients who want to do their own writing, the first thing I hear, Lauren, is, I'm not a writer. I don't know how to do this. I've never been good at writing. And I have a lot of thoughts about that, but writing is certainly a skill that can be learned. And so much of social media writing, especially, is emulation and reverse engineering what has already worked. There is nothing new under the sun. And you're doing a heck of a job at it. And I'm emulating somebody else. So the stone just rolls downhill. So I think it's a lot of things, but getting over those initial mental hurdles and convincing yourself that my story should be told, it's worth writing, it's worth improving, it's worth getting it out there. Like you said, I'm living proof that it has literally changed my entire life. And that's not an exaggeration.
So you mentioned B2B. These folks who are listening are like, okay, great, Adam. Good for you, right? Like, I'm happy. Round of applause. You've become this ghostwriter. How are you going to help me? How are what you're going to teach me today is going to make a difference in my job search? Because what I did hear you say, and I think it's very powerful, is in that 16% of people who are posting once a week, right, is an opportunity for you, dear listener, is an opportunity for you, because while everyone else is kind of like playing small or quiet and not necessarily using all their insights, this is also a way for you to do what you're trying to do, which is for people to see your value. So how can somebody who hasn't been necessarily posting or even commenting, what things can they do? Just the first thing that they could do to start getting that ick off of them, or that, kind of misguided perception that this isn't going anywhere.
You don't have to not think that LinkedIn is cringy, right? You don't have to lie to yourself. I'm not ever going to lie to myself I know what I do is cringy. I know posting on social media and promoting myself constantly, there's no getting around it. So I don't think you have to ever clear that mental hurdle. I think you just have to accept that mental hurdle, right? And a lot of people never do. And so I think there's a couple of different, facets to the personal branding growth and the practicality of how writing can help you out, whether it's in your job search or trying to reinvent yourself or whatever it may be. And for the first, let's call it 6 to 8 months or so, maybe even the first year, half the battle truly is showing up, right? I can't tell you in the past 2 years how many people I've seen in my comments that have gone the way of the dodo. They're there and they say they're going to do it and they say they're going to show up every day, and boom, they're gone. They're ghosts. They never come back, because that first 6, 8, 12 months, it is hard to get traction and people get so discouraged, which again creates more scarcity. So I do think for that first year or so, showing up is half the battle. You're not going to know what to talk about. I mean, if I look at my posts over a year ago, I posted about my beer league softball team winning a league championship. Nobody cares about that, but I did it, right? And I learned that that's not what you post about, but at least I got the reps in. And then I think, once you start to get your footing under you and realize the game and start to see a little bit of traction, and by traction we mean engagement, right? Likes, comments, direct messages, things like that. At that point, the switch flips a little bit, and showing up is no longer half the game, because you can show up every single day for 10 years, but if your content isn't good, it doesn't matter. You're just shouting into the void. So I think, you need to build the habit and build the consistency and treat it as, I just have to show up every day. Once you start to see that point, and you'll know when you're there, you should do the pivot and start to think, okay, how do I improve my writing? How do I get more interaction? How do I get more engagement? So there's a couple of different levels to it, the way I see it.
I really love that, because consistency is a hard muscle to build when there are other things that are happening in your job search, right? And so what I want to also do a shout out for is that this works. They're not mutually exclusive. While you're writing, you're developing that voice, and that voice is marketable. That voice that you think is maybe a little herky-jerky, it's still making a dent. You can't necessarily see it yet, but for not 1 second, you executive with 10, 15, 20 plus years are lacking something that the audience doesn't need to hear. And so now I want to ask you the second piece of this. Okay, now that I know that I have this well of knowledge and intellect and talent and insights and accomplishments, how do I distill that down into some good ideas? How do I get to the place where I have a little muscle with my consistency, and now how do I crack that nut of, well, I don't know what to write about?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? And there's a couple of different, very practical things we can look at to distill that down. One is copywriting 101. And if you ever take any copywriting courses or read a single copywriting book, every single one will tell you about this idea of the rule of one. And so many people who don't understand copywriting, which makes a lot of sense because they don't study it, get these ideas all tangled up. And you want to write a post that talks about, for my audience, I want to talk about hooks, and I want to talk about commenting on LinkedIn, and I want to talk about direct messages, and I want to talk about adding followers and reaching out to people. And then I just get this jumbled hodgepodge of all these things where there's no cohesiveness and there's no coherent point I'm making. So from a very practical perspective, treat every post with the idea of the rule of one, right? Less is more. It doesn't have to be super long, but it does have to be focused. And the other thing from a practical perspective.
I want to go back to the rule of one. Okay.
Please.
So let's dig deep into this, because this I just recently learned. So when you have the rule of one, please derail me, get me on the right path. What that means is one idea distilled down in deeper and deeper and deeper. So just keep it clean. So for example, I'll use the one that you put out there today, because I was one of your first commenters of the day. Break my arm, pat myself on the back. Is this whole idea of the impact of social media. To support that, you added an image, and you could see whatever the reverse hockey stick is. I don't know, the slope down. And you talked about the value of writing in social media, and you were also kind of self-effacing, where you were like, well, I'm done trying to convince people like to write. And so help us understand your thought process with the rule of one. Like, what does that mean? If somebody has one idea, how do they crack that open and stay on task? What is the goal there, and how do you break that down? Because this is powerful and simple.
It is, and it's almost unreasonably powerful for how simple it is. And so this idea of the rule of one is going to expand into everything you do in writing. And this is a great point you bring up, Lauren, because the rule of one should really start with your audience, right? Again, people have this idea that you want to write to capture 10,000 eyeballs at once, and that's just such a flawed way of thinking, right? The rule of one, this is going to help you create content for the rest of your life, is that you want to write to one specific person, right? You want to, before you sit down, when you have your idea, you want to create this reader avatar. You know, Stephen King, in his book on writing, calls it ideal reader. And you want to create ideal reader in your head. And you want to get detailed. You don't need to spend a ton of time on this, but how old are they? Where do they live? What do they do? What kind of car do they drive? What do they look like? And this is not a joke. You know, when I do write traditional direct response copy, I will go on Google Images and I will type that person in, and then I will pull them up on my second monitor and I will look at that person as I write, because you have to write to one specific person. And so when you start to put these puzzle pieces together, you have your one specific person and you have your one specific idea. It kind of all snaps into place, right? And you understand what they're looking for, and you can find that one desire or that one pain point, and you can just hammer that, hammer that, hammer that. And anytime you feel yourself deviating, right? Anytime you feel like you're extending this idea or going off on another path, that's a good sign to come back, delete that sentence, and keep drilling down into that point of one. Finally, culminating in the ultimate rule of one, which is going to be one ask, right? At the end of your post, what do you want that person to do? Do you want them to comment? Do you want them to book a call with you? Do you want them to visit your website? Again, this is an area where a lot of people think that I want to put all my links and all my ideas in there. One, all the way through. One ask, one idea, one person.
Wow. Let's talk about when you're writing, because I'm just gonna like say this, right? And I'm fine with this. How are you borrowing help from ChatGPT, from Claude, all those places? Because I was actually having a quick conversation with our dear friend Holly Crawshaw this morning, and I was like, "Is my content getting any better? Is it? Is it?" And she's like, "No, no, no. It is. It is." Well, you know why? Because I'm building with the support of I'm feeding the prompts, no question, but I'm also using my avatar to help me get to what I need to say easier and faster. So, like, how are you using it, and how can other people who even say, "Hey, I'm not a great writer," how can they leverage those tools?
Yeah, constantly. There was a brief period where I was anti-AI, of course, as every writer has to go through this turbulence and think that they're better than AI, which is a ridiculously outdated concept. And I'm using ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity dozens of times every single day. It's absolutely critical to my business, and it's something that you should embrace as opposed to run from. So ChatGPT, just like anything else, or we'll use ChatGPT as this broad idea of AI, is garbage in, garbage out, right? It's all about the quality of your inputs and understanding how to prompt it. And it can create really, really, really good content. Now, I can honestly say I have never taken something from ChatGPT and copy and pasted it. I have to put that disclaimer in there as a writer. However, from a practical perspective, what you want to do, if you go on there and say, please write me, 5 ideas about how I can generate clients for my B2B SaaS, or how I can get in front of people on LinkedIn to get a new job, you're going to get absolute garbage. But if you give the AI an extremely detailed picture of who you are, what your background is, who you're reaching out to, tell it that you want to write witty, snappy copy. Tell it that you want it to sound human and not like AI. Heck, tell it you want all your sentences under 10 words, and tell it that you want white space in between every 2 or 3 lines. Be extremely specific, extremely detailed, and you can get really, really legitimate copy. And if I'm being honest with you and you don't want to spend any time writing whatsoever, if you get good enough at prompting these AIs, you could legitimately copy and paste it and be okay. It's not going to be the best in the world, but it's going to be good enough.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna own it too. If you want to hack it up, and that's not a disrespectful thing. If you want to build that, spend your time in developing the prompts and literally, all of those pieces, not just the ones that you offered, which I think are great, the formatting piece, keep those ideas, and you can make folders. I know you can, at least on Claude. And I use ChatGPT, I use Claude, and I use Perplexity. Are there any other ones? And Perplexity, just for those who may not know, is a killer tool for research. And so when you're researching companies, and certainly when you're researching any C-suiters, people that you're interviewing with, this really, and it also collects articles, images, podcasts, videos. It's deep. So definitely worth whatever. I think it's like $20 a month or something like that.
Those are the three big ones. Those are the three big ones. To echo your point, Perplexity is amazing. One thing I would caution against when using AI is trusting it to do any sort of research for you. Both ChatGPT and Claude are very good at the creative side of things, and I think this will get better. But a lot of people will get caught publishing things from ChatGPT where it will just make things up. It will just lie to you. So if you trust it for factual research, you need to fact check it. And as Lauren mentioned, Perplexity is one of the AIs that sources and fact checks and gives you the sources that it pulls things from. So just be very careful with that. The only other one that I've used that I would mention is Midjourney. If you have any interest in understanding how to create AI images, it's pretty incredible what it can all do. And it's just one of those things where you can't give yourself enough exposure. You can't be too well versed in AI. So I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I've picked up Midjourney pretty quickly, and it's fun to play with.
So you taught us about the rule of one. You taught us how you're using AI. What's the third thing that we need to enforce, offer, share with our C-suiters who are in their job search about their copy, whether it be in commenting, whether it be in any other place, even the about section, right? Because I am sure I'm with you, right? It's like some of these about sections are not necessarily engaging.
Yeah, so I don't think I did a good job of discussing this earlier, right? Earlier, I talked about how half the battle for the first year is showing up. And that is true. I don't think I put my foot in my mouth there. But I think I may have given the perception that this has to take a long time to work. It doesn't. I mean, I work with clients on a one-on-one coaching basis. I had a client earlier this year who I think it was his sixth or seventh post. It went mega viral. He got reached out to by the Kansas City Chiefs organization, got a box suite at Arrowhead Stadium, got all these investors who came to him to invest into his capital raising endeavors. So, of course, right, that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that it takes a year. But understand that telling your story, all it takes is the right person at the right time with the right post. And I think where a lot of people also get tripped up, Lauren, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is this idea that I have to post about my industry and these boring things about my job or whatever it is. Look, when I started doing this, had zero clients, zero experience, didn't know where to start. My dream in my head, I've always wanted to write books, right? I want to be write my own books, but of course, step into ghostwriting as well. In the past 4 months, I've had 3 people reach out to me asking me to write their books, fully understanding that I have never done this before. And every single time, Lauren, every single time somebody reaches out to me, it's not, hey, I love your writing, or hey, like this was super compelling. It's, hey, I love your story. Hey, I love your story. So don't feel like you have to be super technical. Don't feel like you have to talk about business. Of course, you don't need to show the skin and bones of everything about your life, but people want to connect with people. Tell your story. That's the third thing I would say.
I'm so glad that you mentioned this, because one of my favorite client stories was this woman who was in a company for a very long time. She was a CFO, right? She's like the number cruncher. She's like that person, like looking at all the micro data and like all this stuff with metrics. And her entire content strategy was built around pictures of her kids. Because what she really wanted to do was work in her next company where she would be able to be more hands-on as a mom, not just be cranking out the CFO job duties and responsibilities. So she was pointing to that audience that would say, hey, you know what? We don't think you're any less of a CEO or CFO. We think that you also care about your family. And that's okay. That's good. We actually really want that. And they came after her, and that's how she landed, and she never once talked about a spreadsheet, a revenue like win or anything like that. All she talked about was kids and her birthday parties and pictures and all that. Not pictures of her kids, but pictures of their artwork. And it was so endearing. And so I've said this before, and I'll say this to you: people hire people. And so your story is part of what makes you you. And it's hard for people when they have been carting around an identity of a professional and then it's stripped, not to want to replace that. And so as much as you can, please do not ever discredit that. There's a lot of humanity in that. And it's also a way to be able to attract other people who are like-minded. People love a good story. I loved your story about the Detroit Tigers. So sorry. And it actually echoed because my husband is from Detroit, and that was the first thing that he said to me this morning. Please let Adam know I'm really sorry about what happened with his team, right? Like that's like a human thing, and it came from content. So Adam, you write, you're a ghostwriter, you're becoming a book writer, you're doing all these things. I want to just take a little bit of a frontage road or a sideline. What would you tell somebody who is not in their 20s and looking to make a big swing, have a big swing moment, take a risk the way that you did in some of the earlier parts of your life? Because many of these people might not have the freedom, but they have the golden handcuffs.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's hard to answer because it's not lost on me the fact that I was 28 years old when I did this, and I didn't have a family, I didn't have a wife, I didn't have kids. If I failed, so what, right? I had my resume. I could always go back to it. But I will say that this was the exercise that caused me to take this leap. And I do think it will work for anybody in their situation.
Ooh,
and it's an idea from Tim Ferriss, and I'm not sure exactly what the proper title is for it. I've always called it the Tim Ferriss fear exercise. And he essentially says, if you are faced with one of these, what you would consider to be life-altering decisions, what you should do is play out both potential paths in your head and play them out to the worst case scenarios. And so from a practical perspective, for me, this looked like, okay, scenario one, I stay in finance, I work this job for the rest of my life, and at age 65, when I'm ready to retire, I look back and I've just got this massive, massive regret. And I think, man, what if I would have, done what I wanted to do? Versus path B, what if I go do this? What if I make this career shift? What if I take this leap? The worst case scenario there is that this fails, and so what? Like, at least I knew, at least I tried. And his entire point with this fear exercise is that when you play out the worst case scenarios of two possible paths, odds are you'll find that the worst case scenario in the more daunting path is actually significantly less daunting than the worst case scenario in the easy path, in the comfortable path. So it's just an interesting exercise that has changed pretty much the way I see every decision I make in my life.
So the Tim Ferriss fear test, I'm going to put this in the show notes, of course, right? I think that this is a really, really good one. I always use the Jeff Bezos one, right? Which is kind of the same decision tree. You have path A, you have path B. Which is the one that you're going to regret in another 5 to 7 years, and you're going to be like, Dang it. I I just totally I just totally copped out because I was afraid of what was going to happen versus really like commit to that thing that I just couldn't live without. So,
I think so many of us, it's human nature, right? You make worst case scenarios out to be significantly more harmful than they actually are in reality. And I think, again, speaking possibly out of turn here, but I think most people's safety nets are a little bit higher up than they let themselves believe.
yeah, I also think their resolve when they get to those places suddenly kicks into a new level. So
You'll
there's
figure it
that
out.
too.
Yeah.
I actually heard on this podcast earlier this week that I just love this, the idea that, Waze, the app Waze, not Way, Ways, it's Waze for those listening. It doesn't like give you a hand slap when you make a wrong turn. Right? It doesn't go, you dumbass, I can't believe you didn't do that. It just gives you a redirection. It gives you an alternative. And I believe that is happening for us at every single point in time, that there really is no wrong turn. It's just the turn that you take right now. And all of it will lead back to it if you get in the car, put your foot on the gas and start heading down the road, right? It doesn't happen in your driveway. So I would just want to say, Adam, you've taught me so much. You've taught so much. I mean, 7 million impressions, like all that's great. But most importantly is you telling your stories, teaching us on a regular basis how to improve our copy, innovative ways to think about our copy, and also, it is never dry and boring. It's always got some kind of kicker or snap. And I want to say that also inspires a lot of feisty and fun comments, right? It's not so heavy-handed, so it gives permission to those who are engaging. And thank you for everything. Where can people find you if we want a ghostwriter or an author or somebody to co-author or ghostwrite my book? Where can people come?
Sure, Lauren. I'm sure it'll come as no surprise, but LinkedIn is my resume. LinkedIn is my website and all those sorts of things. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I actually recently just launched a 5-day free email course on LinkedIn growth. So if anybody's interested and you don't want to pay money and you want to learn this thing for themselves, feel free to send me a message and I'll drop you the link. But Lauren, I genuinely, sincerely, honestly appreciate you having me. I'm so flattered by the things you've said and just thrilled that we've been able to connect and been able to expand this. And this was just an absolute blast. So thank you so much.
Good. That's the whole goal. I'm glad you had a blast. And for those of you who are not following Adam, please just do it right now, right here and now. Go follow him and tell him you say hi and that you heard the podcast, and make sure that you are consistently showing up for him because he's a show up kind of guy for you. So thank you so much. And for all of you who are listening, I have one final ask, and back to this one thing. Please, if you like this episode, please subscribe to this podcast and write a podcast review, because this is how we grow. And I need your help to grow because we are delivering things that are not ho-hum. And every person who is in their job search and even in their executive career is looking for ways to level up so that they get found, so they can land faster and earn more. So thank you so much for doing that. And thank you so much for being here. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining today. We appreciate your listening ears. Big time. We ask this: use these tools, not tomorrow, right now, and share them by spreading the love, leaving us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss the next career blast in a half. Most of all, thank you for you.